A woman who stops explaining herself to the world becomes the most dangerous force in any room, not because she seeks to intimidate, but because she no longer needs to prove anything. The moment she withdraws her energy from the endless cycle of justification, something shifts in the very air around her. People feel it before they understand it. This is not the silence of defeat. This is not the quiet of the overlooked or the ignored. This is the deliberate, conscious choice to step back from the noise and remember who she is when no one is watching, when no one is demanding, when no one is taking. Most women spend their lives pouring themselves out like water, filling every crack in other people's foundations while their own ground grows dry. They explain their choices, defend their boundaries, and apologize for taking up space. But there comes a moment, sometimes born from exhaustion, sometimes from revelation, when a woman realizes that her energy is not a public resource. Her attention is not community property. Her peace is not up for negotiation. When she finally turns inward, not from bitterness, but from wisdom, the entire dynamic of her existence begins to transform. She stops being reactive and becomes magnetic. She stops chasing and starts attracting. She stops performing and starts being. This inward turn, this sacred focus on self, this strategic silence, it is not selfish. It is revolutionary. Because when a woman remembers her worth, the world has no choice but to remember it too. Where does your energy go when you're not paying attention? This question haunts the lives of women who wonder why they feel perpetually drained despite having everything they thought they wanted. The answer lies not in what they're gaining, but in what they're unconsciously giving away. Energy is finite. Attention is currency. And most women have been conditioned to spend both without ever checking their balance. They give their focus to everyone's emergencies except their own growth. They offer their emotional labor to those who consume it without reciprocating. They explain themselves to people who have already decided not to understand. Consider Sarah, a marketing executive who prided herself on being the problem solver in her friend group. Every crisis called her name. Every drama required her input. Every relationship needed her mediation. She wore this role like a badge of honor until the day she realized she couldn't remember the last time someone had asked about her dreams, her struggles, her needs. She had become so available to others that she had become invisible to herself. The neuroscience is clear. What you focus on expands. When your mind is constantly occupied with managing other people's emotions, predicting their reactions, and smoothing over conflicts you didn't create, you're training your brain for anxiety and hypervigilance. You're rewiring yourself for exhaustion. But when you begin to audit where your energy flows, when you start asking, is this mine to carry? Before every emotional investment, something profound occurs. You begin to distinguish between what belongs to you and what you've been convinced to adopt. You realize that not every problem requires your solution. Not every silence needs your words. Not every tension demands your intervention. This is the beginning of energetic sovereignty, the recognition that your inner resources are precious and should be allocated with intention, not scattered by obligation. There is a silence that speaks louder than any argument. It is not the silence of withdrawal or passive aggression, but the silence of someone who has nothing left to prove. This silence is magnetic because it is complete. It needs nothing from you to validate itself. When a woman learns to be selectively silent, she discovers something that years of explaining could never teach her. People reveal their true nature when they can no longer manipulate your responses. Your silence becomes a mirror that reflects back their intentions, their character, their respect, or lack thereof. Neuroscientists call this the default mode network. When we stop the constant chatter of explanation and defense, our brains shift into a state of deeper processing. We gain access to intuition, pattern recognition, and emotional intelligence that reactive conversation blocks. We begin to see the subtext beneath words, the energy behind gestures, the truth hiding in plain sight. Maria discovered this during a heated argument with her partner about household responsibilities. For months, she had been explaining, listing, justifying why certain tasks mattered to her. Each conversation ended with him promising change that never came. One evening, instead of launching into her familiar script, she simply said, "I see." And then she became quiet. That silence unsettled him in ways her arguments never had. He began to explain, then justify, then promise, but her calm witness remained unchanged. In that space, without her emotional reaction to feed off of, he finally heard himself. The excuses sounded hollow even to him. The silence had done what months of discussion could not. It had created space for truth. Strategic silence is not about punishment. It is about clarity. It allows the dust to settle so you can see what you're really dealing with. It stops you from throwing good energy after bad. It teaches others that your peace is not a debate topic. When you no longer rush to fill every uncomfortable pause, you discover that discomfort often carries important information. That tension you've been trying to smooth over, it might be pointing to something that needs to change. That awkwardness you've been trying to fix, it might be the friction that comes before necessary growth. The woman who focuses on herself becomes a mystery in the best possible way, not because she is secretive or aloof, but because she operates from a center that most people have forgotten exists. She is not constantly broadcasting her every thought, feeling, and experience. She is not seeking external validation for every decision. She is simply being fully, completely, unapologetically. This kind of self-focus is often misunderstood as selfish, but there is a profound difference between selfishness and self-awareness. Selfishness takes from others to fill an inner void. Self-awareness fills the void so there is something genuine to give. The woman who knows herself deeply can love others freely because she is not loving from emptiness or need. From a psychological perspective, this represents what Carl Jung called individuation, the process of integrating all aspects of the self into a coherent whole. When a woman stops fragmenting herself to fit other people's expectations, when she stops performing versions of herself based on what she thinks others want, she becomes integrated, whole, magnetic. Consider Elena, who spent her 20s being the cool girlfriend, the understanding friend, the accommodating daughter. She prided herself on never causing waves, never having needs that couldn't be postponed, never being difficult. But by 30, she felt like a stranger to herself. She couldn't remember what she actually enjoyed versus what she had learned to enjoy to keep others comfortable. Her journey back to herself began with small acts of self-focus, morning walks without her phone, evenings without making plans just to fill the silence, saying, "Let me think about it," instead of automatically saying yes. As she reclaimed her time, her attention, her right to have preferences, something remarkable happened. The people who truly cared about her became more interested, not less. Her mystery intrigued them. Her boundaries earned their respect. Her authenticity inspired their own. The magnetism of self-focus is not about becoming self-absorbed. It is about becoming self-possessed. When you know who you are, you stop being whatever everyone else needs you to be. When you trust your own judgment, you stop seeking constant approval. When you fill your own cup, you stop expecting others to be responsible for your emotional weather. This inner fullness creates what psychologists call secure attachment with yourself. You become your own safe harbor. And from that security, you can engage with others from choice rather than need, from abundance rather than deficit. Emotional sovereignty is the art of feeling everything while being owned by nothing. It is the cultivated ability to experience the full spectrum of human emotion without being hijacked by any single feeling. This is not emotional numbness or detachment. This is emotional mastery, the difference between being a leaf blown by every wind and being a tree that bends but does not break. Most people live at the mercy of their emotional reactions. Something happens, they feel, they react, they regret, they repeat. But the woman who has cultivated emotional sovereignty has learned to create space between stimulus and response. In that space lies her power. When triggered, instead of immediately reacting, she breathes. She feels the sensation in her body, the tightness in her chest, the heat in her face, the clenching in her stomach. She acknowledges the emotion without becoming it. I notice I'm feeling angry rather than I am angry. This subtle shift in language reflects a profound shift in consciousness. Neuroscience supports this approach. When we pause before reacting, we shift from the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, to the prefrontal cortex, the center of executive function. This shift literally changes our brain chemistry, moving us from fight or flight to mindful response. Rachel learned this the hard way. For years, every family gathering ended with her in tears, triggered by her mother's passive-aggressive comments about her life choices. She would defend, argue, storm out, or shut down, all reactions that gave her mother more ammunition and left Rachel feeling depleted. The turning point came when Rachel decided to treat her mother's comments like weather, something to notice but not be controlled by. When her mother made her familiar barbed remarks, Rachel felt the old surge of anger and hurt. But instead of reacting, she breathed and responded from curiosity rather than reactivity. What makes you think that? The question, asked without defense or attack, completely shifted the dynamic. Her mother, suddenly faced with an audience that wouldn't engage in the familiar dance, had nowhere to go with her negativity. The power dynamic that had defined their relationship for decades crumbled in that moment of emotional sovereignty. Emotional sovereignty does not mean you don't feel. It means you feel fully and respond wisely. It means your emotional reactions inform you rather than rule you. It means you can sit with discomfort long enough to find the wisdom it contains. The most profound truth about personal transformation is that it ripples outward in ways we never consciously intend. When a woman changes how she relates to herself, everyone around her must adjust their relationship with her. This is not manipulation or strategy. It is the natural consequence of energetic shift. Think of relationships as ecosystems. When one element changes, everything else must rebalance. When you stop being available for drama, dramatic people either evolve or exit. When you stop explaining yourself, people either respect your boundaries or reveal that they never respected you. When you stop performing for approval, you discover who loved the performance and who loves the person. This mirror effect can be initially uncomfortable. People may resist your transformation because it forces them to examine their own patterns. Your growth highlights their stagnation. Your boundaries challenge their entitlement. Your peace disrupts their chaos. Dr. Judith Lewis Herman's research on trauma recovery shows that when someone heals, it often triggers discomfort in their social system. The roles everyone played, rescuer, victim, persecutor, no longer work when one person refuses to play their assigned part. This is why personal growth can sometimes feel lonely. You are becoming someone new while others expect you to remain who you were. But here is the miraculous part. As you hold still, die in your transformation, as you maintain your new energetic signature despite others' resistance, something beautiful begins to happen. The people who are meant to be in your life at this new level begin to appear. Old relationships either evolve to match your growth or naturally fade away. New connections form based on who you are becoming, not who you used to be. Samantha experienced this when she finally stopped being the family peacemaker. For 30 years, she had smoothed over conflicts, mediated disputes, and absorbed everyone's emotional overflow. When she stepped back from this role, her family initially panicked. They tried guilt, anger, and manipulation to pull her back into familiar patterns. But Samantha held steady. She remained loving, but boundaried, caring, but not caretaking. Slowly, her family members began to develop their own conflict resolution skills. Relationships that had been shallow and dependent began to deepen into genuine connection. Some family members couldn't make the transition and distanced themselves, but those who remained created something more authentic and sustainable. The mirror effect teaches us that we cannot control how others respond to our growth, but we can control whether we abandon ourselves to make others comfortable. And when we choose growth over comfort, authenticity over approval, we create space for genuine relationships to flourish. True transformation is not just mental or emotional, it lives in the body. The woman who has learned to focus on herself and embrace strategic silence carries herself differently. She moves from center, she breathes from depth, she occupies space without apology and creates safety without effort. This embodied presence speaks before words are spoken. It communicates through posture, pace, eye contact, and energy. It says, I belong here, I know my worth, I am not available for disrespect. This communication happens below the level of conscious awareness, but is felt by everyone in the room. Somatic psychology tells us that trauma and conditioning live in the body as much as the mind. The woman who has learned to fawn, to make herself small, to absorb others' emotions, carries this in her posture, her breathing, her muscle tension. But as she reclaims her right to take up space, as she practices breathing deeply and standing tall, she literally rewires her nervous system. This is why practices like yoga, dance, martial arts, and breathwork are so powerful for women's empowerment. They teach the body new patterns of strength, flexibility, and groundedness. They create physical memories of power and grace that the mind can draw upon in challenging moments. Consider how different it feels to have a difficult conversation while standing versus cowering, while breathing deeply versus holding your breath, while making eye contact versus looking down. The body's position influences the mind's capacity for courage and clarity. The embodied woman does not need to announce her strength. It emanates from her. She does not need to demand respect. Her presence commands it. She does not need to prove her worth. Her being demonstrates it. This embodiment becomes a form of leadership. Other women sense her groundedness and feel permission to find their own. Men encounter her self-possession and recognize authentic feminine power. Children feel her stability and develop secure attachment patterns. The ripple effects of one woman learning to inhabit her body fully, to move through the world with conscious presence, to take up space without aggression or apology, these effects are immeasurable. When enough women learn to focus on themselves and embrace the power of strategic silence, a quiet revolution begins. It is not a revolution of anger or protest, but of withdrawal from systems that no longer serve. It is a revolution of presence, of authenticity, of energetic integrity. This revolution does not need hashtags or manifestos. It spreads through embodied example. One woman learns to say no without explaining. Another woman stops giving her energy to people who drain her. A third woman begins to trust her intuition over others' opinions. Each act of self-reclamation creates permission for others to follow suit. The patriarchal system thrives on women's emotional labor, their tendency to explain and accommodate, their willingness to abandon themselves for others' comfort. When women begin to withdraw this unpaid labor, when they begin to focus on their own growth and well-being, the entire system must recalibrate. This is not about becoming cold or uncaring. It is about becoming discerning. It is about recognizing that your energy is sacred and should be invested in people and situations that honor its value. It is about understanding that your silence can be more powerful than your words, your presence more influential than your performance. The woman who learns to focus on herself becomes a catalyst for collective transformation. She shows other women what is possible when you stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided not to understand. She demonstrates what happens when you stop making yourself small to make others comfortable. She embodies what it means to love yourself enough to protect your own energy. This silent revolution is happening now, one woman at a time. It is happening in boardrooms where women stop apologizing for their ideas. It is happening in relationships where women stop accepting less than they deserve. IT is happening in families where women stop being the sole emotional caretakers. Each woman who chooses herself, who embraces strategic silence, who focuses on her own growth and healing, contributes to a larger transformation. She becomes proof that another way is possible. When a woman learns to focus on herself and stay silent, she is not becoming less. She is becoming more authentic, more grounded, more aligned with her truth. She is not withdrawing from the world. She is returning to herself so she can meet the world from wholeness rather than woundedness. This journey requires courage because it means disappointing people who have grown comfortable with your self-abandonment. It means standing in your truth even when others prefer your performance. It means trusting your inner wisdom even when outer voices try to convince you otherwise. But the reward is immeasurable. You discover that you are enough, not because someone told you so, but because you finally stopped looking outside yourself for confirmation. You realize that your peace is not dependent on others' approval. Your worth is not determined by your usefulness, and your value is not measured by how much you give away. In your silence, you find your voice. In your solitude, you discover connection. In your self-focus, you learn to love others more freely. This is the paradox of true empowerment. The more whole you become, the more you have to offer the world. The woman who focuses on herself and stays silent does not disappear. She appears fully, authentically, unapologetically, and in her presence everything falls into place, not because she forces it, but because she has finally stopped forcing herself to be anything other than who she truly is. The revolution begins with you. The transformation starts within. The healing spreads outward. One breath at a time, one boundary at a time, one moment of choosing yourself at a time. This is how everything falls into place, not through H-force, but through focus, not through noise, but through the profound power of conscious silence, not by becoming someone else, but by finally becoming yourself